What's going on, everybody? I'm Jerry, and today I'm going to be going over my top five contenders and pretenders in the one video. Just these are all teams that I think are good. Let's not go away from that fact. I think these are all great teams. These are all probably playoff teams. Um, Contenders are more going to be teams I think have a chance at the Super Bowl. Pretenders, more teams that I think could be first round exits and aren't going to play very well. So let's get right into it. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And we're going to go through the pretenders first. Number five of the Seattle Seahawks. Now, I have them lowest in the pretenders because I actually had them in the contenders, and I started looking at more at what they had done and just some of the game, just evidence from the game. What would tell me that this team is going to be a contender? And then I find inconsistencies at quarterback. Geno Smith pretty much guaranteed to turn the ball over. Their defense has kind of been in the middle statistically. It's not all stats, of course, but you got to look. I don't want to be a box score bandit, but you have to look at the stats and how they've played in games, and their defense has just been mid-tier to where I don't see them making a playoff run and winning. Of course, you're going to have years where that happens. Referenced the Giants before, where just kind of look mid. The whole team looks mid, squeak into the playoffs, win the Super Bowl. But I don't know. I don't have a lot of faith in the Seahawks. They're 5-2, which is great. You can see the teams beat Lions, Panthers, Giants, Cardinals, Browns. Beating the Lions, good game. Beat them in overtime. So you got to get wins like that if you want to be a contender. Again, that's why they're at number 5 in this category. I don't really see them to be a huge pretender, but when I was looking at the other teams that I do believe are contenders, I felt like they had to be in there. Browns actually was going to be the option. I was thinking about putting the Browns in there, but I think there's a chance they could miss the playoffs, especially just because they don't know what they're doing at quarterback. Well, I mean, I know they want to put Deshaun Watson in, but with his injury, that seems to be an interesting situation. But so I don't know if they're going to make the playoffs, and especially in that division too, tough division. So could have put the Browns, but you get a win over the Browns. You get a win who have been good and beating good teams. A win over the Lions, who have been a good team this year so far. But the Seahawks, just for some positivities, they're top 7 in yards and points per play on offense and defense, which is very impressive. So you'd think with a team like that they'd be higher, but again, you look at the teams they beat. They beat the worst 3 teams. They beat the Panthers, who are the worst. Cardinals, arguably worst. I mean, they're both kind of 32A and 32B. And then the Giants have not been great. They've been an absolute mess. And that was in one of the weeks where they, hadn't been able to put much of anything together. But again, you show promise when you beat the teams like the Lions. You beat a team like the Browns, who have been on kind of a hot streak recently. But Seahawks are also 11th in giveaways and 14th in takeaways, which for the combination, that is one of the higher things in the league. And I think being able to prevent turning the ball over and get the ball on defense are very important. So I did mention, the inconsistencies at quarterback, some of the problems Geno Smith's been having. You can pretty much guarantee that he's going to turn the ball over in the game, but the rest of the team seems to be holding on to it well and making smart plays, kind of saving him a little bit there. And again, I don't see Geno Smith being a quarterback at the end of the day that can make a playoff run. So that's why they end up being in at the 5 slot there for the pretenders. Next, we have the Lions, who I just talked some good about, being a good team, but they've really only beat bad teams. They've lost to the good teams. So that's a very easy way to just put that there. And you can't go week to week because teams have fluke losses, like the Lions did against the Ravens. 38-6, just getting absolutely smoked is not good at all. So you look at something like that, you think, is that sustainable? Can you be a team that goes through a season and then can have a loss like that? And even a lot of my teams that are in the contenders list, they have a bad loss. And I think pretty much every team has a bad loss or two. Actually, every team does, now that I'm thinking about it. So can't really factor that in at all. But if you look at the teams that they've beat, I still think the Chiefs loss was kind of a fluke. That's Bears, inner Bears fan. A fluke loss, not a Matt Eberflus. Um, anyway, the Chiefs, beat them. They beat them by one. They don't have Chris Jones or Travis Kelce. You're gonna have to beat the Chiefs if you want to win a Super Bowl. Probably, or beat a team that can beat the Chiefs. So I don't. It's gonna be a tough. You can't. You can't only win by one, in my opinion, with their second and third best player out. You beat the Falcons have been very mid this year. The Packers have been awful. The Panthers have been awful. The Buccaneers are finally starting to show that they're awful. They were 3-1 at one point, if you can believe. If you can believe that. And then the Raiders are an absolute mess. So all their wins, except for the Chiefs win, which again to me was a fluke, was a loss. So that could have been a loss. And if you look at the record and they go, oh, they lost to the Chiefs, they lost to the Ravens, and they lost to the Seahawks. You go, how could that team really be a contender? And that's why I ended up slotting them in. They're 6-2. They're good. I've got a bet. My friend Jason, $100 bet. He bet me that they would win 11 or more games. And he probably is going to win that bet now that I look at that, which is unfortunate for my $100. But regardless of that, the teams that the Lions have beat are 19-26, and that stat alone is inflated because of the Chiefs being a team that you barely beat. That's 6-2 right there. So you take off 6-2, and you got 13-24. So the teams that they've beat, let's just call it for that sake. You can't rule out. You got to beat the Chiefs, but ruling that out, 13-24 against the teams they play just is not good, and I don't think it's going to be sustainable. I think they'll make the playoffs. I'm very confident they'll make the playoffs. There's no team. Bears, Packers, Lions are all horrible. Or Bears, Packers. Oh, I just said Lions. Vikings. Bears, Packers, Vikings. All looking bad. Vikings look good, but Kirk Cousins is out now, so I don't see Jaron Hall or Dobbs making a run for it. So they're going to be in the playoffs, but I don't think it's going to be sustainable. So Lions end up getting the 4 spot. Next, we move on to the Dolphins. Dolphins at 3. Unproven. Must have auto-corrected there. My bad. Unproven defense. You have Jalen Ramsey get a nice pick last week, but their defense has been like bottom 10 in like every stat category. Not good at all. The teams that they've beat, we mentioned this for the Lions, are 11-27. You look at the teams that they beat. They beat Chargers, Patriots, Giants, Broncos, Panthers. I mean, and they beat the Patriots twice. That's great, but the Patriots are not a good team. And then you look at their losses. They lost to the Bills by 2 scores and to the Eagles by 2 scores. I think that Eagles loss should have a bit of an asterisk next to it because they just were not being penalized. The Eagles didn't get a single penalty, and it was kind of ran by the refs in that game. So you kind of have to think about that too. But looking at the Dolphins, their offense is unbelievable. Their offense, 271 points scored. The next highest is 224. That's in the league, and that's their points scored right now. I'm recording this Saturday night or Saturday like late afternoon. So haven't played all the Sunday games yet. So probably would have been better to get this out sooner. So maybe the Lions have a dominating win this week, and then that moves them up in the rankings. But for right now, being halfway through the season, that's what I'm putting them as. They have 36 touchdowns scored. Next most is 27. I just don't think that's going to be sustainable. They're 25th in points per game or yards per game, and on defense. So they're allowing a lot of yards, a lot of points regardless, and I don't think it's going to be sustainable. It's great that their offense is good, and you get Jalen Ramsey back, and if their defense can prove themselves, then I could see them being a contender. But I feel like their offense is pretty much unstoppable, but their defense is not great. So with that being said, I felt like they had to slot into the list again. Whether it be looking at stats and looking at the teams that they've beat, there's not an impressive team there. All those teams are bottom tier teams. You could argue maybe the Chargers are like a mid tier team, but they still have not been good. And the Chargers typically don't win games, at a high rate. They might kind of like the Dolphins, play well on offense, but unlike the Dolphins, they lose games. So Dolphins end up being at the 3 spot. And then just consistently, I feel like our pretenders every year is the Dallas Cowboys. I have them at 2. They're bad losers, so they are they have bad losses, so they get absolutely smoked by the 49ers. It was like 42-6 or 42-7 or something. Just a horrible loss. And then they have they lost to the Cardinals, which Cardinals the fact that their one win is against the Dallas Cowboys is very impressive for the Cardinals. Also very bad for the Cowboys. You also look at their wins. So like they beat the Giants by 40. They beat the Patriots by 35. They beat the Jets by 20. All those wins kind of inflate all their stats. So like if you are a box score bandit and you like to look at all the stats and you look at the Cowboys and you go, wow, look at this. Well, they're holding their bad opponents to like, under 10 points. And then they're scoring a lot because their defense is getting a lot of turnovers. So I still think their offense is fraudulent. You have a great week last week from Dak Prescott and CeeDee Lamb. And then Tony Pollard has kind of shown that he is a lot better off when there is an every down back and he can kind of be that fill-in guy. But he's still playing well. He's not playing horrible. He's not like a bottom tier running back. He's still going to be a good running back. It's just he's not having as much success when he can just come in. So with all that being said, I just feel like they're one of the most, this is every year that you can talk about how they're a fraudulent team and they're not going to make it to a Super Bowl. And I think it's just the same this year. Obviously, it's nice that the Cowboys defense is still playing well, despite Trevon Diggs being out. But I think, you lose Micah Parsons or another big piece on that defensive line, and I think they'll be in real trouble because their defense is really carrying them, in my opinion. Again, you can look at the stats, but and see that their offense might be playing well. But if you watch the games, their offense doesn't have to do much because of how well their defense plays. When they get wins, how much they go up early and kind of get that leverage over another team. But you lose, just get murdered by the 49ers, and your only really good win is the Rams, who are still like 3-5 right now. The Rams are not doing too well. I think the Rams are actually still like a probably a top half team, but I don't know if they'll be a playoff team. I don't think so. And I think that at the very least the Rams are better than we expected, but still not a great team. And then they do have the upside again is the 77 point differential, which is 4th in the league. But again, that is very kind of inflated because of these 3 games where they just murdered bad teams. Obviously, the Jets kind of put it together and have been better, but that's been recently. That game was early in the season. So, I think Cowboys are fraudulent. They'll probably make the playoffs. But I don't think they're going to go anywhere. It could be a first-round exit, or even maybe lose just the next round if they squeak out a win against a bad team or something. But Cowboys are definitely second most fraudulent, if not first. But the first goes to the Pittsburgh Steelers. And I was trying to think of like how to like rank these because I think the Steelers could end up not even making the playoffs, and that's why I thought about moving them down. And this is like the one team of the entire list that might not make the playoffs. But the Steelers have been outgained in all 8 games. The coaching over there is just absolute madness. Between people want to fire Tomlin, then they want to and they've always wanted to fire Canada seemingly. So their offense is 29th in points per game, 28th in yards per game. Yards per play is 26th. Third down conversion rate's 21st. Touchdowns per game is 26th. And been outgained by the opponents in all the games. I mean, you look at the teams that they beat, kind of a fluke win, in my opinion, against the Ravens. Ravens play a bad game and have a fluke loss. Beat the Browns, who I believe that was a P.J. Walker game. Or no, that would have been a Deshaun Watson game. But still, it was early on. You don't really know. I believe, that was the first game. So, like, I don't know. At that point, it's just the Steelers' offense has not looked good. Their defense has kept them in games, but the main reason that they're number 1 is because there's no reason they should be 5-3 with how poorly they've played. They just should not have a 5-3 record. And that's kind of the big reason for me is I think, of these top 5 teams too, I think they'll probably have the worst record. Again, I don't know if they're going to make the playoffs, even being 5-3 right now, in a tough division. But yeah, Pittsburgh Steelers are definitely the most fraudulent team right now that's in the playoff picture. I don't think it's even close, to be honest. Again, the fact that they might not make the playoffs, and they're 5-3 right now, and they've beat teams like the Ravens and the Browns and the Titans, who have been kind of mid to bottom tier team, just kind of goes to show why they are the most fraudulent. Let's move on to the contenders. I moved this one around too. I actually, when I said that I had the Seahawks and the contenders. When I was kind of looking over everything again and putting some stats in there and watching some highlights and some film on some of the other teams, you just see the Jaguars just continue to win games. And I think because of their continuously winning games, beating teams like the Bills, beating teams like the Saints, who are not amazing by any means, but still probably a top half team, or like at least a mid team. It seemed right to put them into the contenders. They are 23rd in third down conversion, 23rd in red zone scoring, 23rd in giveaways per game. But they're number 1 in takeaways per game. Again, teams they beat the Steelers, who have some wins against some good teams and are 5-3 right now, beating the Bills, who are a top tier team. I could have put the Bills in here. So that was the one team where you'd want to put them in as contenders, and I guess I'll spoil it. I didn't have them in here because it was just, I think some of the flaws that they've had, mainly the injuries, like losing Matt Milano and Trey White was probably one of the biggest things that's hurt that team. And I feel like their offense, if Josh Allen gets injured, you could say this about any team, but they're definitely done. Chiefs, any quarterback gets injured, you're done. But even just losing like Stephon Diggs, or even losing Gabe Davis. Obviously, they lose Dawson Knox, and then you have Kincaid, who you can finally see how talented he is. But that's why they're number 5 on the contenders list. I just think that the Jaguars have been surprisingly consistent as far as their defense playing great, and you still have Trevor Lawrence, Christian Kirk. Calvin Ridley's been phenomenal this year. Zay Jones has been injured a little bit, but he's a weapon. Travis Etienne has been a great running back. So you put all that together, and they have to be on the list. They're lowest on the list. They have the lowest point differential of all the 6-win teams, which there's only a few, of course, but it's pretty low for what it is. And then they lost to the Texans too. This is kind of this team's bad loss. I mentioned every team kind of has a bad loss, and this one was the Texans. But I put in the notes there, I put tough schedule because they have a really tough schedule coming up here these next few weeks, and this is where we're going to really be able to tell if they're contenders. But I looked at the games and I looked at the matchups and I went, I think they might be able to win some of these tougher games, and that's why they ended up making it onto the contender list as opposed to the pretender list, but at the 5 spot. 49ers, they still make it onto the contenders list. I put you can't forget about the early on. The early in the season, they looked like they were unstoppable. Now they put together these 3 losses, but they murdered the Steelers, Rams by a touchdown. They murdered the Giants, murdered the Cardinals, murdered the Cowboys. And it was 42-10, actually, not for, I think I said 6 or 7. Either way, 49ers were just murdering teams early on. And, they lose to the Browns, very close loss to the Browns. Lose to the 49ers, very close loss to the 49ers. And then lose to the Bengals. It was by 2 scores, but they've been dealing with the injuries. So that's kind of why I think that they were very deserving of being high up on this list. And I think, going into the season, there's a lot of teams where, like, we look at the Bengals and we go, they typically, and that was another team I could have put in the 5 slot, thought about it, had to put the Jaguars in there just mainly because their consistency, not to go back on that. But 49ers, looking at later in the season, there's teams that get hot towards the end of the season and they end up making playoff runs. And I think it's okay for the 49ers to come out of the gate screaming and be great. And then few games throughout the season. They have some bad losses, builds up a fire in them, and then they start coming back. And I think they are a team that could get hot when the playoffs come around. I think the Bengals could too. That's another reason I think I keep going back to this Jaguars, but I was very on the fence about Jaguars, Bills, Bengals. I think any of those teams you could put in the contenders list, and but I just think the Jaguars have been more consistent. That's why I put them there. I don't think I have to mention that anymore. I've said it too many times already. But the 49ers are top 9 in pretty much every offensive stat that there is. And then top 5 in like most of them. There was like one stat that I saw. So it's statistically phenomenal despite having this 3-game losing streak. The Browns, Vikings, Bengals. And then their pass offense and defense has just been kind of average, and their defense has slacked off in these past few weeks. And then you have Brock Purdy finally making some mistakes, and you put poor defense performance and then mistakes by your quarterback. That's just going to result in losses. But they're in a slump now, so that's kind of why they have to be in the 4 spot. I just think you can't forget about what they did early on, and I think this is just kind of a fluke. They're going to lose a couple games, but I think they're going to fight back and they're going to be good. So they get the number 4 spot. Moving on to number 3, we have the Baltimore Ravens. I thought about putting the Baltimore Ravens higher, and this is kind of another thing. I was looking over everything, trying to decide what teams I wanted to put where. I actually had the Ravens, when I was making this, I had them at 1 at one point. Just because of their consistency. Kind of the same reason the Jaguars make the list. The Ravens make it higher because as far as efficiency goes, they're one of the top offenses in rushing and passing. So their passing is a little bit behind. Like the efficiency from the Dolphins has been phenomenal, and the Dolphins pretty much get 1 in every category. But the as far as like yards per play, yards per game, their rushing has been top tier, and their passing has actually been top tier too, despite having one of the lowest pass play. Actually, I think they have the lowest pass play percentage. So they're still running the ball at a higher rate than everybody else in the league, but they're passing the ball at one of the most efficient rates as far as, Lamar's had a great completion percentage. He's strung together quite a few good games. The Ravens end up slipping into 3 because you lose to the Steelers, granted only by 7, but they only put up 10 points in that game, and their defense let the Steelers offense, which is horrible, put up 17. So there's their bad loss, and then they lose by 3 to the Colts, who have also been a bottom tier team, and that's why they can't really move much higher. But they also beat the Bengals, they beat the Lions. The Browns have looked good this year, and the Texans, had a good run early on. Who they lose week 1 to the Ravens, but either way, they still strung together a lot of good games. They're actually first in points per game on offense or on defense, and second in yards per game as well. So I was talking about their offense before. Their defense is playing like one of the best in the league, and when you put those side by side, it makes a good case statistically to put them at number 1. Again, I don't think it's just based on stats. You have to look at how the games are played, and then you also look at the 2 not bad losses, but being to a bad team against the Steelers and the Colts. If they just have one of those games in the playoffs, they're out. They can't do that. They're going to have to beat good teams consistently. When you have 2 losses to bad teams, it just has to move you down. So I end up moving down to 3. I am going to be doing, we're going to go over all this again later in the season. We'll do a more updated contender and pretender list. But for now, Baltimore Ravens stick at 3. Eagles get 2. Made a good case for 1 as well. Thought about it. Best record in the league. How can you not put them at 1? Well, the reason I can't is because all their wins have been very close against these bad teams. Their defense is definitely worse than last year, so their offense is carrying the load. And if somebody can figure it out, they can beat them. They have the win against the Dolphins is really their only win against a good team. Again, the Rams, I mentioned, I'm a little bit higher on the Rams, I think, than other people, and I think the Rams are a pretty good football team, but they're still, at the end of the day, they're mid-tier, especially with Stafford being out now, they're just going to be a mess now that Stafford's out. So if Ripien's playing this week and he has to play a few more weeks, that Rams team's going to be horrible. But Eagles did beat a decent Rams team at the time. But the Eagles have their fluke loss to the Jets. They lose by 6 to the New York Jets, who are surprisingly 4-3, and in a case where if they're in a worse division, might make playoffs. It's going to be tough just in the division that they're in. But either way, the defense is worse, but they're still 7-1. So they're finding ways to win games, and that's what you need to do to be a contender. And that's why they get the 2 spot. Again, their defense has just been very mid. Their pass defense has been very bad. Their run defense has been very good. Statistically, they're one of the highest up. Got Jalen Carter, still Fletcher Cox in there. Hassan Reddick's been dominant over there. Not much Nolan Smith, who I'm sure was a great piece for them to add. They have Jordan Davis too. So all the interior guys have been great against the run, and they're doing well there. But they're pretty much top 6 too in every offensive stat. There's like one stat that they were a little lower, but everything is like 3, 4, and then 5, 6 for pretty much everything. Looking at just their team rankings amongst the NFL. So when their offense is playing like that and their defense is still good, I'm not saying their defense is bad. I'm just saying it got worse. They had one of the top defenses in the league, and now they're probably still top 10, but they're closer to 10 than 1 for sure, just with their performance. And you could even probably make an argument, if you're an Eagles hater, that they're out of the top 10 in defense just because they have allowed a lot of points this game, and they've been closer in some of these games against these bad teams, which, obviously they're putting together the wins, but I don't think it's going to be sustainable, and that's why they're at 2. Again, I think they very well could be a Super Bowl team at this point. When you look at the teams that are 2-1, they're NFC, AFC. So obviously that means the Eagles are probably my NFC favorite at this point for the Super Bowl. So this is not a discredit. I'm just pointing out their problems. I think that shows them to be worse than this team here, the Kansas City Chiefs, at number 1. I put, fluke losses. They lose. Their only 2 losses are to the Lions by 1 point with their second and third best player out, which is obviously Kelsey and Chris Jones. And then they lose last week to the Broncos. Mahomes has his flu game, throws a bunch of picks and fumbles, a bunch of fumbles across the whole team. So a lot of problems there. I still think it was a very fluke loss. Of course, you lose to the Broncos. That's not good. Broncos being one of the worst teams. And you look at the other teams the Chiefs have beat. Jaguars are probably the only good team in there. Bears, they smoked them. Barely beat the Chiefs. They're the Chiefs. Barely beat the Vikings. And barely won a lot of these games. Their defense, despite having the problems, is still second in points per game, 4th in yards per game. And we know that the Chiefs' offense can be dominant. You would have liked to see him get a receiver other than Mecole Hardman, but unfortunately, that's just what happened. They didn't get one. Rashee Rice has been pretty good, and I'm sure they like having Mecole Hardman back as kind of a bit of a gadget player. Pacheco was doing pretty good early on, but has kind of fallen off, and I don't know. It's tough for me not to put the Chiefs number 1 just because they always seem to come when they need to in the playoffs, and I don't think that basically this whole time I've been going through looking at the what excuses can you make for teams, and the excuse for the Chiefs is that they lost with Patrick Mahomes having the flu and having probably his worst performance as a starting quarterback in the NFL, and then to the Lions with their second and third best player out. Name who's the next best player on the Chiefs after Travis Kelce and Chris Jones. Probably Creed Humphrey, maybe at center, or maybe you could point to Nick Bolton. I don't know. Starting to name people after those 3, you lose one of them, it's going to hurt. And if they lose one of them in the playoffs, it's going to be very difficult. But Andy Reid's offense is dominant. They still play very good football. And with how well their defense has been playing, it makes them a very scary team. And the reason that I have them at number 1, again, could make arguments for a lot of them. Here's the overall overview of all the teams. So we got, Chiefs, Eagles, Ravens, Niners, Jaguars, again, I think that Jaguars spot, looking back at it, you could switch that out with the Bills or the Bengals. I'll mention it final time, fourth time I think of this video, is Bills and Bengals haven't been as consistent. Bengals have the rough start. Bills had some bad losses, so they don't make the list. Jaguars have just consistently won. Great defense. And then the Steelers have to be number one in the pretenders list because all these teams on the list have 5 or 6 wins, or 7, 5, 6, or 7. Eagles being the one with the 7. And the fact that the Steelers have 5 wins, I feel like they have to be on the list. But I just think they're the most fraudulent. I don't think they're really going to go anywhere. I think the Seahawks probably can't make an argument, especially after mentioning Bills and Bengals for the contenders portion. But yeah, so that's going to be all. Thank you for watching. Let me know down in the comments what I got wrong. I'm sure there's going to be some disagreements with me dick riding the Chiefs here. I'm not a Chiefs fan. I don't want to see them win. I got to be honest though with my assessment, and I just still like. It seems like the Chiefs are going to be one of those teams where in the playoffs you know they're going to be in it. Eagles definitely being the team on the NFC for that right now. 49ers could definitely slot in there if they don't have a stretch like they've had now going into the playoffs. And then I'm pretty confident Cowboys are going to lose. Think the Dolphins could make a playoff run, looking on the pretenders side. I don't think the Lions could do it. I don't believe in them. I'll continue to not believe in them. Jason, I know you love the brand new Lions, but not for me. So thank you for watching. Again, like, comment, subscribe, and have a great day.